Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I'm Chantal Hale. I'm your host, your MC for tonight, and welcome to week 4 of the CompTIA Security Plus Prep Short Course with George Thomas. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So welcome to everybody. For those of you who've never been to one of these short courses, congratulations on coming to week 3 as your first one. IT Masters, if you don't know, is an online education organisation offering IT postgraduate qualifications with IT industry knowledge embedded in them in conjunction with Charles Sturt University. So this short course is based on not only the CompTIA Security Plus certification, but also we use that certification in the IT Masters subject ITI 581, Cybersecurity Fundamentals. We've got our host here tonight, George Thomas, who will be presenting week 4, and I'm told we've got some exciting labs to go this week. Welcome, George.
Thanks, Chantal, and yeah, welcome to week 3, or welcome back for those that have been here the past 2 weeks, now 3 weeks. We actually have probably quite a bit to get through tonight, so I will just get on with it. As Chantal mentioned, there will be a bit more, I guess, of a lab element tonight, and it's going to be difficult to troubleshoot labs, but hopefully this is pretty straightforward, so I'll try and provide as much guidance for anyone that wants to follow along at the same time. So, as pointed out here, we are in week 3. We're going to focus on threats and vulnerabilities. And with that, I'm going to go to this particular slide because the probably most time-consuming thing of tonight, if you haven't already, and I know it was mentioned in last week's webinar, what the download required was, but ParrotSec. So if you haven't already, jump onto the ParrotSec website. So this one here. So if you go to ParrotSec, so parrotsec.org, download, and then select download security edition, and you can download the OVA file. The other thing to note is that if you are, most likely you're going to need a virtual machine, a hypervisor. So I'm using VirtualBox. So yeah, I would suggest you grab that too, but this will probably take a little bit of time to download depending on the speed of your internet connection. So I've decided to mention this right at the start, and it can just download in the background while we go through the content. So that's the first part. Now, let's talk about vulnerability management. So vulnerability management, what is a vulnerability? Well, probably self-explanatory, but effectively it's a weakness, right? It's a weakness in a in a system, in a piece of software, in a piece of hardware. It is a vulnerability, and a vulnerability which is a vulnerability can be exploited. So a threat actor, for example, could exploit a vulnerability and use that to perform some sort of malicious actions. And so it's important that vulnerabilities are identified and prioritized and remediated. So, as pointed out here, I know I just kind of said that, but vulnerabilities in an operating system, for example, can lead to significant problems when successfully exploited. I think having kind of been in this space for for many years, and having run some of the other IT Masters as a subject matter, the IT Masters courses through CSU, one of the vulnerabilities that which is basically kind of, it's always a little bit sad, but it's kind of like etched into my brain, is MS17010. And so MS17010, so MS, which identifies it as a Microsoft vulnerability, and 17 being the year 2017, and 010 I guess that was the 10th one for the year. Many of you have probably heard, maybe not of it as MS17010, but as Eternal Blue. And then if you haven't heard of it specifically as Eternal Blue, you definitely will have probably heard of WannaCry. And so that was the ransomware that went around and kind of, shut down quite a lot of organizations and across the globe back in 2017. And what this is an example of where there is a vulnerability. There's a vulnerability that's out in the wild. An exploit was created, and then a threat actor used that to spread ransomware across the globe. And the interesting part about this was back in 2017, my view, and from what I saw, is that patch management was nowhere near as robust as, and the processes were nowhere near as good as what they probably are today. And so even though Microsoft, for example, released a patch to fix this vulnerability, many organizations hadn't applied it. In fact, they took the unprecedented step of writing a fix for Windows XP, Windows 2003, which was already out of support. So it was, it was end of supported life, and it was such a significant piece of operating system that was still out there everywhere, where organizations hadn't moved to, newer versions, that they created a fix for it. Unfortunately, many organizations didn't apply the patch, and well, we saw what happened there. So I think that was me trying to make sure that the importance of vulnerabilities and vulnerability management and patch management can't be understated, because that, for example, was a very large global event. But not to pick on Microsoft here, other operating systems, Apple, Linux, Android, iOS, they all have potential vulnerabilities. So it's important to keep to identify, prioritize, and remediate those vulnerabilities. And so what types of vulnerabilities are there? So legacy
Sorry,
systems.
George, just before
Yes.
you carry on, because you did say that you want people to download while that happens. There are a few categories, right editions of the Parrot OS, and people are asking which version to download. Just wanted to confirm that one.
So security edition.
Okay, that doesn't seem to be an
and
option.
then there may be two other questions. Well, yeah, I mentioned that, but there might be two other
Yeah.
questions, which is AMD 64 or ARC. It depends what operating system you're running. Most likely you're running like a piece of Intel hardware or AMD, in which case AMD 64. That's the most common one.
Sorry, I'm not trying to say that I don't understand. If you go back here, yeah, Kit sent me the link. Sorry, guys, for doing troubleshooting on the fly.
No,
The
download.
options, yeah. So this is the one where I'm like, I don't even know from here.
It's up to you. Virtual, usually. You can, yeah, just do virtual. Sorry, that didn't come up before.
Thank you. Sorry.
And security, and then it's probably this one. Most likely.
Thank you so much.
And then here, yeah, sorry. It's a bit hard when it's like, this is what I prepared earlier. So I think I might have accidentally gone past that step. Right. Legacy systems. And sorry, I'm still recovering from some sinus things, so I clear my throat a lot, and I may go on mute if I need to I don't know, cough like crazy. Vulnerability types, legacy systems, and I kind of alluded to that in the previous slide where I said that Microsoft took that unprecedented step of patching Windows 2003 XP. This is that cough that's coming. Hang on, sorry.
I should work on my vamping skills to just have something to say while you do that.
It's been going all week. It's very annoying. Luckily, you can't get it through Zoom. So legacy systems are basically platforms that are no longer supported. They're old. They should be replaced. For example, if someone's running Windows NT4, that's legacy, 100%. In fact, if you're running Windows 2012, 2012 R2, legacy. Anything that's considered a system that no longer is supported by the vendor. And that really ties in well with end-of-life systems. So, and so with end-of-life, this is about where the system's end of life, and then there's end of supported life. So sometimes the system's end of life, but it still has support. And then beyond that, it becomes an end of supported life system, in which case you can't get patches for it anymore. In which case this is quite high risk, because if a vulnerability is detected, no one's going to write anything to fix it. So, and I think, it's important for Security Plus to make sure that you understand the difference between end of life and supported life. Then you've got firmware vulnerabilities. So think about firmware as the software that runs hardware. And you've got things like virtualization vulnerabilities and application vulnerabilities. So virtualization being around your sort of virtual infrastructure and things like that. So thinking about hypervisors, and then applications being anything to do with applications like software. So if you've got like a web application, a website with vulnerabilities, that's an application vulnerability. Or a desktop processing app that has a vulnerability, that's an application vulnerability, versus an operating system vulnerability. Right. And then you've got zero-day vulnerabilities. So these are unknown. A zero-day vulnerability can apply to software or hardware, but the key thing is that it's just been discovered. And so when it's a 0 day, it's just become known. It says there, traditional security measures like antivirus and firewalls are often ineffective. And that's because they haven't had time to get signatures to identify that this is a malicious piece of code. So zero-day vulnerabilities are really high risk. They're worth a lot of money to threat actors because, there's going to be a high hit rate of organizations that won't be able to stop those particular vulnerabilities. In fact, those MS-17010 vulnerabilities, when they first came out, was 0 days. So, and if you have ever gone looking at things like Stuxnet, again, 0 day vulnerability is used. And so, when you look at Stuxnet, and it says here, adversaries generally use a 0 day vulnerability against high value targets, I'd say that a nuclear power plant is probably a high value target. So, those vulnerabilities are they're less likely to be detected. And as a result of that less likelihood, they're more valuable, and the hit rate is going to be a lot higher. So that's what a 0 day is. And as it sort of points out there, those traditional signature-based detections won't be able to detect those 0 days. There's some more advanced technology now that kind of looks at behaviors and things like that, and it may have a better detection capability. But generally speaking, when we think of 0 days, we think very, very high risk, and high success rate. Misconfiguration vulnerabilities. I mean, this is just like poor configuration. So default configurations. So you think about devices that have admin password as their username and password, and no one ever changes it. That, even though that's not technically well, it is misconfigured, but it's like a default. So it's come like that, and no one's bothered to change it. So that would, for example, be an example of a misconfiguration. Another one might be rules that aren't tight enough. So, for example, if you have a firewall sitting in front of a web server, and you allow all traffic in rather than only the required ports, so TCP 443 and 80. That would be considered a misconfiguration. Second. So those are, really common. It says cloud services here. When we think about things like the OpenS3 buckets that, kind of went rife a few years ago, that could be considered a misconfiguration. So it was supposed to be secure. It was left open because someone didn't configure it properly, therefore misconfiguration. Funnily enough, there's tools out there that can scan and find misconfigurations, and vulnerability management tools, which we will get into. And sorry, I say that when I say tools out there, as in internet-based tools. Shodan, for example, that can identify devices that are misconfigured. But then there's also vulnerability management platforms that will do that, and we'll have a look at one of those a little bit later. Then you've got cryptographic vulnerabilities. So if we think about cryptography, when we think about the CIA triad, so confidentiality, integrity, and availability, confidentiality, integrity, and confidentiality, especially, but can't discount integrity, rely often on cryptographic controls. So, for example, we talk about encryption at rest, encryption in transit or motion, and encryption in process. And the point here is it is securing information from unauthorized access. If there is a cryptographic vulnerability, that means that somebody who is unauthorized is now able to look at that information. And if we look at something like Kirchhoff's principle, it establishes that a crypto system should be secure. That's, so it needs to comply with that. And so improperly protected keys is an example of that. Weak keys. There's also the whole concept around cryptographic systems and protocols and algorithms not being secure. I haven't done it this time, but when you do like cryptography 101, you sort of start with like the sort of Caesar cipher. So the Caesar cipher, obviously back in the days of Caesar, basically being a very basic letter substitution, and the key being a number. So saying, the key is 5, and what you're doing is saying, okay, well, if it's A and the key is 5, then you just move 5 letters to the right and you end up with E. Now, at a very basic sort of view, that is technically, encrypted in some way. But as you can imagine, that's going to be highly ineffective. If you fast forward nowadays, we obviously have more advanced algorithms and so forth. And if we look at things like encryption in transit or encryption in motion, you'll see, the use of TLS, so transport layer security, and TLS 1. Let's say there's 1.2, 1.3, I think is the now supported. If you've got TLS 1, for example, that's now considered not secure. If you're running SSL, so you probably have heard of the term SSL, secure socket layers. And it's funny because people still refer to, is it SSL? But they don't actually mean that. They mean, is it TLS? Because if you've got something encrypted using SSL, SSL2, SSL3, SSL1, it is not secure. So, that, for example, is cryptographic vulnerabilities. So if you're configuring a server and you're configuring it with SSL or TLS 1.0, that's a cryptographic vulnerability. It should be a supported, non-vulnerable encryption method. Then if we look at devices, thinking about, phones, and you've probably seen these terms before: sideloading, rooting, jailbreaking. Basically, it's about gaining elevated privileges on a mobile device. So if you think about Apple, for example, anyone that's got an Apple phone, I know lots of people do, it could be very difficult to do anything outside the bounds of what Apple permit you to do. For example, you can't just go and easily load a piece of software on there. You have to go through the App Store and buy it or whatever. So the concept of rooting, jailbreaking is about gaining administrative access to the phone. So that the idea is that you could put anything on there and you basically have a lot more access over the device. That obviously comes with risk, because now when you're doing this, you could potentially download malicious software, malicious apps. The apps could run something at a higher privilege because you're running it as an administrative user. So this is going to be potentially risky. Many organizations will ban the use of devices that are, rooted or jailbroken. But it's often not straightforward to detect that's happened. So just something to be aware of. So let's look at specific vulnerabilities around application and cloud. Right, so here we have some examples of application vulnerabilities. Got race condition, time of check to time of use, memory injection, buffer overflow, type-safe programming languages. Look, type-safe programming languages, I mean, that's not really a vulnerability, but we'll come to that. And then malicious update. So race conditions. So I won't go through all these in a lot of detail, but be familiar with these and what they are. But race conditions, it's basically a type of software vulnerability or application vulnerability That happens when a program is dependent on a sequence of timing and events. So if a application has to do things in a specific order, and a threat actor can manipulate that order, that is taking advantage of a race condition. If I look at something like buffer overflow, that's again an anomaly. So you've got like the buffer in the allocated memory, and going beyond that buffer is overflowing it. And that sounds like a fairly self-explanatory thing, but that could do things like trigger a response that damages files. It could change data, or it could leak private information. Type-safe programming languages I thought was interesting, because that's really about validation and validating the code that's sitting within an application. And for example, I write code in a type-safe language, which is C#. So it helps prevent type errors. Where was I? Oh, and then malicious updates. So malicious updates would be taking advantage of the update portion of an application and injecting a malicious piece of software into that. So application, some high-level application vulnerabilities. Evaluation. So what are ways to evaluate applications from security vulnerabilities? So here are some of the practices that we would need to look at. Security testing. So security testing, pen testing, ethical hacking, sort of very, very similar, but basically doing a test against the application to see if there's any vulnerabilities. Doing a review of any documentation is going to be something that's pretty important, just to make sure that there's sufficient documentation to secure the application. Source code analysis. So this could be difficult, but let's say hypothetically, if you've got access to the source code, looking for potential issues, and I'll talk about some web application attacks in a moment, but looking for potential weaknesses in the code. So is this particular piece of code vulnerable to an injection of some sort? And I'll talk about what that is in a minute. Again, looking at things like configuration and cryptography, and making sure that it's using supported and non-weak ciphers and algorithms. Reviewing security architecture. So is this best practice? If you look at something like AWS, for example, they have the AWS well-architected framework, and looking at how the AWS system should be architected for best security practices. I think Microsoft have some similar stuff as well for Microsoft and for Azure. And then the compliance verification piece. So are they complying with their policies? Do they have something like ISO 27001? Do they have SOC 2 Type 2 attestation? So looking at all these different things can help evaluate an application and make sure that it is as secure as it can be. Obviously, nothing is guaranteed, but it's about risk management. The whole thing is about risk management. If we look at web application attacks, so this specifically targets applications accessible over the internet. So through your browser, for example, you need to be familiar with these terms. So XSS, CSRF, and SQLI, or cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, and SQL injection. So chances are there will be a question about that. I know that when I did the exam, and it was many, many years ago, there was definitely some questions that were very relatable to this. Has been a while though, but I'm going to say they're probably still there. And so what we have here is make sure you can differentiate the difference between a cross-site script and a cross-site request forgery. And so when you look at XSS or cross-site scripting, this is really about sanitization. So the user can the input is directed into a page without proper sanitization, so it's not cleaned up. So for example, special characters is something that should be cleaned up to make sure that it doesn't break the application. Remember, hacking is about making an application or a piece of software or something do something that it's not supposed to or not intended to do. So anyway, if I go back to this cross-site scripting thing, the script gets executed. For example, when a user clicks on the link, and then that can then allow all sorts of other things to take place. So it could basically send a request back to the server to do something. It is similar, I think, in some ways to SQL injection. So I've done a lot of work, and I've done pen testing work where you try and find obviously all of these, but SQL injection is usually a very common one. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with SQL, the structured query language, which is the database language that's used by many databases out there, for example, Microsoft SQL or Postgre or MySQL. But basically, if you can imagine, you've got a data set. So you've got a table, and let's use Access, for example. So if you say, I want to select all the records from a table called table 1, you would go, select star from table 1, and it would return all the records in table 1. It's a very basic example. And so what will then happen is sometimes you might want to specify parameters. So you might say, I want to get everything from table 1 where column 1 is X, or something. So you would say, select star from table 1 where column 1 equals, apostrophe X, apostrophe being the quotes. Now, a bad way to code would be to basically generate a string to say, select star from table 1 where column 1 equals apostrophe quote plus text box 1, which is where you put in whatever value it is, plus apostrophe. I should just write it out. Can I just do that? Annotate. Right. Here's an example of injectable. Probably see this. So if I did a query like this, right, where column 1 equals this plus text box 1 dot text plus, right? Okay. So if I did something like that, a threat actor could leverage text box 1 and inject code into there. And what they could do is they could do something that would be kind of tricky, like they could, and I've done this. I've done this as part of engagements. You could use it to download the user table, or you could use it to drop a table. But you can basically inject another query into that text box and append it to the query that you've got. So that's an injection attack. So you're basically injecting code into something that's vulnerable. There's obviously ways to get around it, using things like parameters and so forth. That's probably well outside the scope of what we need to cover. And obviously sanitization, so sanitizing input so that it can't be broken into. But just I think for the purposes of this, that just trying to give you some context on what a SQL injection is. Cool. Uh-oh. How do I get rid of this now? Is it there forever?
No, it can't be there forever. Do you want me to Google it?
No, clear.
Great.
There we go. Sorry. And then you get, I was trying to, that was me trying to illustrate what I'm talking about. It's easier to draw or write there, isn't it, than to try and explain and visualize. So cloud-based application attacks. So this is about targeting applications hosted on cloud platforms, clearly. Very similar in some respects to web applications, because a lot of cloud-based applications are web applications. So there's going to be probably quite a bit of overlap. But there's also the infrastructure. So there's infrastructure that sits underneath the application. So if you think about cloud and you think about your various AAS, so you got IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, so infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, for example, software as a service. If you think about a software as a service, that's basically a web application that sits on top. And that would be subject or vulnerable to potential web applications. If you go kind of below that, you'll have infrastructure, which sits below it because it has to kind of, run on something. And so there's obviously going to be potential vulnerabilities there as well. So those are just things to be aware of. Obviously, organizations like, Microsoft and AWS and Salesforce are going to be quite rigorous on making sure that all those updates are applied to the infrastructure. However, you'll have organizations that will leverage something like Microsoft Azure that use IaaS. So you basically spin up your own, Windows instance, for example, or your Linux instance, and then you're responsible for that. In which case, as the consumer of the IaaS solution, then you need to make sure that that your vulnerability management is adequate. And what happens then, cloud as an attack platform, and I've seen this a lot, is where cloud platforms are abused for the purposes of an attack. So an example is I've seen a lot of business email compromise situations where a threat actor has found a vulnerability in cloud infrastructure. They've gained access to that IaaS platform, and now they're launching an attack from somebody else's cloud platform onto another party to try and commit fraud. That's basically how that works. And the issue is when someone eventually works out what's happened, and they go to forensically investigate what's happened, and they go, "Oh, it's come from here." The owner of that cloud platform is not the threat actor. It's the threat actor has hijacked somebody else's platform. And then you've got cloud access security brokers. So a CASB is a platform that is used to apply security to cloud. And so what it does is it enforces policies effectively. So here it does things like data leakage prevention. It does things like making sure people are logging in from the right origins, and not trying to access from somewhere that they shouldn't. So yeah, cloud access broker is really about enforcing security policies in the cloud, because that can be complicated. All right. I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm not even halfway through my deck. Maybe we look at some questions for a moment while I just have a drink.
Absolutely. We have a few questions. We've been Kit has been fairly vigilant answering any questions she can, but we've got a few ones here. We started off with what are your thoughts on the differences between vulnerability management in ICS IoT environments versus ICT environments? I'm going to be honest, I don't understand most of that question, so I'm hoping that that's relevant.
Operational technology, the thorn in my side. So ICS being industrial control systems and IoT being Internet of Things, but basically that would refer to, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Michael? But my understanding of that is when you're looking at software that controls physical hardware. So if you think about critical infrastructure, for example, that would, think about a piece of software that will control a turbine or control a gate. That would be potentially an industrial control systems. I do a lot of work in the operational technology space because of my job. It's not critical infrastructure, but we have physical systems that are run by software. And the thoughts, my thoughts are that it can be a lot more difficult. So I think the maturity, and I can't speak for every organization, just what I've seen over the past few years, I find that the OT space is a bit more decentralized. I find that there's a lot less sort of consistency in terms of, it's not like every device belongs to a centralized, domain, for example, with centralized patch management. So I think my thoughts are that it can be a lot more complex and a lot more tricky. And the other thing is, because sometimes, depending on what industry it's in, you're dealing with physical hardware, the risk profile is different as well. So yeah, it's a good question, but I think it's one that there's a lot of factors to consider. And I know I'm certainly spending a lot of time thinking about it, because those systems are historically have been kind of not as secure, and as I'm talking quite broadly here, as the IT systems, which have, I think, had a lot more focus over the past, couple of decades.
Great. Thank you for that. Next one, I think, is If antivirus and firewalls are not effective in preventing zero-day vulnerabilities, what is the best way to handle this?
Again, I'm not going to provide an actual answer just because, that's like consulting. And I don't want to be like, but he said that. Um, However, what I will say is that you'd probably start. I'm going to do this is where I would start. I would start looking at things like application control, for example. So app control, um, where and that's not going to work for everything, right? App control will work when you're trying to execute something that a signature-based platform won't detect. And so by basically saying you just can't run anything, whether it's malicious or not, then it prevents that from running. Having said that, that's not going to be entirely effective if it's going to be if it's going to be a threat actor attacking something that's like a running service. And so I think it's a bit of a tricky one, and I think this is where tools like um, you know the advanced threat detection and stuff that are looking for anomalies are going to probably be the most suitable. Firewalls are an interesting one as well. You know, Typically you kind of hope that your firewall is secure and can prevent those requests from coming in, but we obviously have seen there was certain vendor, I won't name them, that was found to have a lot of issues. So I think there's no bulletproof way. It's going to be, again, that sort of defense in depth approach where you're looking at multiple controls, which again, it's going to depend on um, what attack vector is used. But yeah, as I said, things like app control, things like advanced endpoint threat detection, things like, that sort of monitoring and so forth. Even if it's going to be a case of picking up an indicator of compromise, that's probably going to be the best way to handle that. Unfortunately, no silver bullet.
Oh, well, I thought there would be a silver bullet, but apparently not. One last
Well, I did.
question
I did have
before
a silver
we.
bullet many years ago when I was going through one of those sort of. I was going through a certification lab for a particular vendor, and I said, "Oh, you could always just pull the Ethernet cable out." The problem is, which would prevent from network-based attacks because you can't attack what you can't connect to. Unfortunately, that creates another issue, which is that whole availability part of the CIA triad. As in, you've unplugged it, you can't be attacked now, but you actually can't do anything. So, that's not really any better. I
That
thought for a
makes sense.
moment there that might be my silver bullet.
Makes sense. One last question just before we move on, I'm sure. Are Facebook accounts hacks examples of cloud as an attack platform, or am I lost? And that's the person who asked it, but obviously I'm lost. Trying to relate trying to give an example, I think they're trying to do there.
It's a good question. I don't think exactly. I mean, that's more of an impersonation type thing. That's more just of a plain kind of scam, as in someone will hack an account to pretend to be you. And I get why this is being asked. Uh, it's funny, isn't it? I feel like it kind of ticks the attributes of, well, it's in the cloud, it's an impersonation. You're trying to do this. They're trying to hide who they are. It sort of does kind of lend itself to maybe. I think of cloud as an attack platform a little bit differently, where it's the use of cloud infrastructure. So it's the use of so again, anything cybersecurity is probably a little bit gray. So I guess you could potentially say, yeah, maybe. But the examples that I've seen are more around someone gains access to a cloud, infrastructure platform like a Windows VM running in Microsoft Azure or a AWS Linux box, and they're launching an attack from that. And they're using that infrastructure, or they're using a mail server that they've hijacked. So yeah, look, I think that's probably where I was going. Having said that, I think it probably does somewhat fit the bill. So yeah, I think it's a good question. Maybe I need to look at it a bit more because I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, I'm sort of going through my head thinking, it's plausible. But I think you're on the right track anyway. So, all right.
Great.
Cool. I will keep going. Vulnerability management. Yeah, we got a lot to get through. I'll get rid of this thing. There we go. Can you see the Q&A box when it's on my screen? No. No. Okay.
I cannot, so
It's tricky.
I'm assuming the students can't.
Yeah, that's fancy. All right. So vulnerability identification methods. Vulnerability scanning. I mean, this is really, and it says the cornerstone of modern cybersecurity practices. And the idea of vulnerability scanning is identifying, classifying, remediating, and mitigating vulnerabilities. Okay, I mean, it doesn't really mitigate them or remediate them, but it helps identify and classify, which then lends itself to remediating and mitigating. So, what vulnerability scanning does is it effectively will scan a system asset, and there's multiple ways to do that. It can either scan across a network, or sometimes there's agent-based ones where agents are deployed onto, so agent being a piece of software is deployed onto your fleet of systems, and it reports back, say, hey, vulnerability X is here. For example, this system is vulnerable to MS17010 as an example. And what it does is it will report that back, and then it'll prioritize it and say, okay, well, this is a high, medium, low vulnerability, and at which point the person that's reviewing can determine what to do, what course of action to take. It can also help identify misconfigurations. So that's typically going to be stuff like default credentials. So you put in a firewall or a switch and you haven't changed it from admin or admin password. It's going to find stuff like that. The example on the right here is OpenVAS. OpenVAS is a free vulnerability scanner that is installed on Kali Linux, but you can download it separately and install it. And there are some others, which I will just quickly flick forward. So OpenVAS, Tenable, there's also Rapid7, Qualys, there's like a whole bunch of them. Yeah, so vulnerability scanning, really important. In terms of when it's run, depends. Agent-based vulnerability scanners tend to report back more often, so maybe several times per day, whereas organizations that do network-based scanning will do a periodic scan. So maybe they scan weekly, maybe they scan monthly, maybe they scan fortnightly. Given that vulnerabilities change often, the more the merrier, I say. But sometimes that's not plausible, especially in a large environment. Like, it may be a case that, if you do that, you might not even be finished by the time you have to scan again if you do it daily, for example. And also, needs to consider if there's going to be any impact to the environment. Because I've seen vulnerability scanners like mess with printers, or mess with, infrastructure that's not very stable. So I've seen that before. So there's also the concept of credentialed and non-credentialed scans. So a credentialed scan means that you give the scanner an account, and it logs in to whatever the target system is and has more visibility of what's in there, and therefore can see more and detect more vulnerabilities. A non-credentialed scan is like an anonymous user, and it will be limited. So, it may not be able to find everything. It will kind of just see what's exposed to it as a user that has like no access. And then you've got things like, application and web application scanners. So they may go a little bit differently in terms of not looking for vulnerable pieces of software, but they may rather look at whether something is vulnerable to web application attacks, like the OWASP top 10 types attacks. So, potentially SQL injection or session brokering and stuff like that. So different types of options there. And then you've got threat feeds. So threat feeds are really important for anyone that's implementing ISO 27001 2022. You will have seen that, threat intelligence is now a new control that's in there, but it's about getting information about what the threats are, what the threat landscape looks like. There are some free sources out there. So Checkpoint and Kaspersky have some pretty impressive real-time type stuff. In fact, I keep doing this because I'm usually on a Mac and I'm using the same keys. Oh, now I've got this bar in the way. How do I get rid of that? Yeah. So if you look at this one here, This is the checkpoint one that I can't seem to make any bigger. Oh, crap. Sorry. Cool.
Do you need me to chat while you do that?
Yeah.
Um, we do have one of the people had put a question there. Well, it's not really a question, but they just responded a little bit more to your one of your answers, which is machine learning based anomaly detection can be another option. And I believe that was about the question about effective ways in preventing zero-day vulnerabilities.
Yeah, that's like the advanced threat stuff. That's the kind of more next gen. I mean, the term next gen's thrown around a lot, but yes, absolutely. And so there are apps out there and platforms that do ML based detection. So yeah, thanks. Agree. So yeah, here's an example of the Kaspersky one, which kind of, shows some of the real time. I don't know if this is streaming okay or whether it looks awesome on my screen.
I
But
can see it looks great.
so that's one. Yeah, there's also a cool APT one that I sometimes show when I do uh, cyber warfare terrorism. But yeah, here you go, botnet activity detection. So anyway, plenty of open stuff out there. If anyone, that's so if you're in Australia, you can also get threat feeds from various groups. I know the Australian Cybersecurity Centre have the JCSC program as well that can, they can, I know there's a whole bunch of requirements to get into there, like NDAs and so forth. I don't know what that is. But anyway, sorry, I meant this thing looks like a video game. And there's some threat intelligence sharing there as well. I'm just going to keep going. That thing is putting my head in a little bit. All right. Some open source examples: Xforce Exchange, FireEye. Sorry, FireEye. That's proprietary. So yeah, there's a few proprietary and open source examples here. And then yeah, information sharing organization. So that says ISACs. As I said, in Australia, JCSC is one of those. There's also open source intelligence, or OSINT. And so OSINT is about what is publicly available. So the things like using search engines, using blogs, social media platforms, LinkedIn. Obviously, there needs to be some level of vetting, news sources. But yeah, that's all open source stuff. And threat actors will use open source intelligence to conduct campaigns. So also be aware of things about, for example, your organizations that are on public sources, and what is visible. For example, by doing a NS lookup, I could see, if someone has the Microsoft 365 platform pretty easily, providing they haven't put another layer in front of it. And so that could be used by a threat actor to then, launch a campaign. Deeper dark web. We're not going there. But it is, again, the deep web being part of the World Wide Web that is not indexed by search engine. So it's still the same effective, net. It's just not indexed. So, there needs to be a bit of a different way to sort of navigate around there. So there's, the Onion router, Tor, which you may have heard of, gets access to that. Again, this is one of those places where I'd say tread with caution. If you don't know what you're doing, perhaps don't go there. But it is definitely a place that's, used by, threat actors to not only gather information, but to obviously potentially sell or publish information when it's, caught up in a breach or whatnot. So vulnerability assessment methods, so penetration testing. So unknown environment, or previously known as black box testing. So that's so when you engage a penetration tester to test something, whether it be a network or a system or an application, and you tell them nothing about it, you have to tell them usually something, as in, this is the IP range, is usually a good start. Otherwise, or what you may do is say, well, you try and work it out, and before you actually do anything, confirm, because that could create some legality issues. Known environment is where they're given more information. They may even be given credentials, and that's previously white box testing, and that somewhere in between is great. And you get things like bug bounties, where people will try and break into something, and whoever or someone tries to find vulnerabilities, and they can submit a bug bounty and they get money and all that sort of stuff. So there's various different ways to do that. And then good old auditing. All right. Well, I'm going to have to hurry on. I've only just ticked over halfway on my slides. So common vulnerability and exposures. So CVSS score is something that you need to be familiar with. The CVSS score is basically the score that is given to a vulnerability to kind of give some sort of metric on how critical it is. So a 9+ is a critical. And what 9 usually means is that it is, high risk, it is being actively exploited. So threat actors are using it. And, if you're going to fix anything, it's probably that. If you're given a choice between a CVSS of like 1 and 9, and providing it's applicable to your organization, for example, so you wouldn't bother fixing, potentially well, you probably fix a 9, but if you've got like a 5, and it's on a server that's isolated, like it's air gapped from the entire network, for example, it may be acceptable. But it helps, this whole thing helps to prioritize what needs to be done, and yeah, CVSS scoring is really useful from that perspective. Then you've got the concept of false positives, false negatives, and log review. So and I was trying to get these modeled up. So a false positive is something that shows as a positive when it is not. And then you've got a false negative, which is something that shows as negative when it is. Now, arguably, a false negative is worse than a false positive. So I think so. I think I've got this the right way around. So if you have a false positive, then you're saying, oh, we've got a problem, when you really don't. When a false negative is a we don't have a problem when you really do. And I find that was a lot worse. So that's the concept there of vulnerabilities that go undetected in the scan. So it's really important to review the scans and make sure that, there's no false negatives or false positives, and to validate them. All right. I'm going to have to move a bit faster. So a couple of things here. So malware, viruses, worms, Trojans. There's different categories here. So if you look at these categories of viruses and worms, Trojans, and potentially unwanted programs, I think we probably know, to try to distinguish the difference between them. So viruses and worms spread within code without authorization. So they spread from computer to computer. For example, WannaCry or NotPetya would have been classified as a worm. So even though they would have used an exploit, which is MS17010, because they will travel without authorization, they're a worm. A Trojan, on the other hand, is, as the name suggests, is it's hidden within something else. So a piece of code that's concealed within, for example, a spreadsheet with a piece of malicious code in there would be considered a Trojan. And then a potentially unwanted program is just, it says there bloatware. It's sometimes when you buy something, I don't know if anyone's ever done this, you download it and go, oh, that looks good. And then you realize that it's just full of ads and annoying things, and it's really dodgy. That's a pup. So, and you don't really want any of this stuff. So yeah. And then we've got computer viruses. The term virus came from, the goal of the first virus writers. This is back in the 1980s. And I always talk about, like, also, the Morris worm and Robert Morris. But anyway, this was to demonstrate how that, code could infect files and spread between files like a virus. So that's why they were called viruses. There you go. And then you've got, worms. So, where a virus will require media to replicate. So I don't know if anyone's as old as me. You get a disk from your friend, and they, it would have a virus on it, and you had to, like, you put the disk into your computer, and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, and you had to, like, clean that mess up. Whereas worms were different. Worms are and they're fileless and can replicate, and they can do that over networks and things like that. So that's where there's it's a little bit tricky. And then we look at fileless malware today. We're starting to see things like living off the land attacks. So that's living off the land being the ability to use the tools that are already on an environment. So things like PowerShell, for example, and leveraging PowerShell to exploit a network would be considered living off the land. All right. Ransomware. I think we all probably know what ransomware is, but if you haven't seen it before, it's basically where or files in the system get encrypted, and then the threat actor will ask you to pay, in this example, Bitcoin to get your files back. It's never quite that simple. That's something that's kind of popped up probably since about 2017. I mean, it was around before that, but I think it really went a bit crazy for the last sort of 5 or 6 years. These are all pretty self-explanatory. The only one that's probably not self-explanatory is the logic bomb. So a logic bomb is really a piece of code that's inserted into software that will set off when a particular condition is met. And the example that's used is if you've got a computer programmer that and not that I'm suggesting anyone would do this, but let's say it starts deleting files if they're ever fired. That would be an example of a logic bomb. So there's a condition, programmer gets fired or gets angry or whatever, and then they set off this logic bomb, which then does something malicious. All right, be familiar with these terms. I'm going to just say that. So terms like TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, indicators of compromise, be familiar with those and what they mean. So maybe if you haven't got the text, you can just look these up. I mean, these are all pretty common terms, but certainly do that. Sorry, physical and network attack indicators. Physical attacks mean physically breaking into a building. Things like brute force, so physically breaking in. RFID cloning and skimming, so copying access cards and things like that. Those are different types of attacks which happen in the physical world versus network attacks, which happen in the logical network environment. So things like credential harvesting, command and control, all those sorts of things, stealing information, data breaches, command and control. So command and control is where you've got a piece of malware sitting in an environment. It's looking out, for example, to the internet for instructions from somewhere. I've seen things like Twitter or X used as a command and control remote effectively. So a piece of malware sitting in an environment is looking for a particular tweet, and then it sees it and then it executes. So that's the concept of how command and control works. DDoS, which affects availability. When we think of the CIA triad, that's about overwhelming a system so that it can no longer provide services. So that's DDoS. There was one a few years ago called Mirai botnet, which affected IoT devices, funnily enough, but it was like refrigerators and smart TVs, I think. So effectively, this malware was able to recruit home appliances as its bots, and then was able to use those systems that are internet connected to direct traffic and overwhelm a system. So that's DDoS. So while this typically isn't destructive, it does hinder usually availability. Then we've got DNS attacks. I guess again, understand these, have a bit of a look about what these are. Look at what these different types. Probably don't have time to go through every single one of these, but get familiar with these DNS attack types. That's all right. I've only got a couple of slides left. So wireless attacks, it's important to disable unused connections and scan for rogue systems, because wireless attacks are pretty easy to stand up. I mean, think about it. You just go down to Officeworks or Best Buy or wherever you are and buy a wireless access point, and then you can use that, and people will connect to it because they think, oh my God, I'm getting free Wi-Fi. And then you can, it can be used to intercept traffic. So threat actors do this. Threat actors, and talk about, evil twins. There's devices, or I don't have my, so I think it's behind me somewhere, device called a pineapple, and it can be used to mimic a legitimate network. So, again, it's important to look for these things. And then password attacks. So be familiar with these as well. So brute force attacks. So brute force attack basically being trying to guess every single password for the purposes of breaking in. And again, machine learning is starting to make these things more effective, because ML can be used to facilitate brute force attacks. It used to just be tools like John the Ripper, which is I think on ParrotSec and Kali, that randomly generate stuff. But now the use of ML can do that as well. Also, downloading breach password databases and doing things like password spraying is also very common. So taking credentials from people's leaked accounts and using that to spray into systems to see if we get a hit. Yeah, lots of different types of password attacks. All right, I'm going to pause there for a moment and we'll just go to this lab.
So while you go into that, I'm really sorry, we're not going to get to every question because it's already been an hour and everyone, we only have so much time tonight. While you load that lab, I'm going to quickly remind everyone surveys are going to go out for this course in the next few days, and it's really important to us to get responses to these surveys, just not only so George can hear how amazing he is, but also so we can know about the next courses we should do and things you liked and didn't like and all those sort of things. So George, don't type an answer. You can say an answer.
Oh, it was just that Kali one. I'm just writing yes.
So apparently the question is, can we use Kali Linux tonight instead of Parrot, whatever,
Yeah.
Parrot
I mean, obviously
Security?
this is going to be in Parrot, so if there's an issue, I don't know, but it theoretically should be fine. In fact, OpenVAS may already be in there. Funnily enough, I'm going to use Tenable. So which actually is to the second point. Are there any vulnerability scan tools that cost money, have to pay to use, and are they much better than the free ones? Is it worth spending the money? So the answer is yes, there are definitely paid ones. So Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, they're all paid tools, although we are going to look at Tenable Nessus tonight, and there is a free flavor that is limited. So I think you only scan 15 IPs and it's for non-commercial use and all that sort of stuff. The question is, are they better? Short answer is they have a lot more features. So while OpenVAS will give you very basic vulnerability scanning, something like a Tenable, I can't remember what it's called. It'll come to me. The Tenable product or the Qualys Guard product and all those, and Rapid7 Insight VM have a lot more functionality. So for example, if you're in an environment that needs to do PCI scanning, you'll have a PCI template. I'm pretty sure that doesn't exist in OpenVAS. If you want to test against like the CIS benchmarks, you could do that with some of those commercial paid scanners. So there's a lot more to that. Also the agent-based stuff. I don't think there's any agents for OpenVAS. So yeah, a lot more flexibility, functionality. But if you're looking for just we need to put something in and see if we've got any vulnerabilities, we've got limited budget, then OpenVAS may do the job. Yes, to some degree for penetration testing. So this is a question about structure, methodology, and processes of penetration testing. I mean, there are penetration testing certifications and things like that as well. So OSCE have one, so it's offensive security. CREST is a big one. So there's going to be some frameworks and some guidance there. Obviously, when you think about penetration testing, not every environment is the same. So it's not really a how-to. It's kind of more of a high-level framework, as you sort of pointed out. But typically it's probably going to follow something like we haven't really talked about this, but some of the frameworks like the cyber kill channel, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So organizations that do testing will typically follow one of those. If they're doing web application testing, for example, they'll follow most likely OWASP. So it really depends. Oh, not this again. Okay, so
Are you gonna run into the labs? Let's do it. Let's get the labs done so that everyone can enjoy them.
First thing is, and sorry, I'm going to do this kind of funny thing where I'm going to suggest going to if you haven't already, I don't know if anyone wants to start. So hopefully everyone's been able to get Parrot working. I'm going to step back very momentarily. If you have downloaded the Parrot OVA file and you've installed VirtualBox, which I'm hoping you're there, you then just need to, and this is pretty quick, you need to import the OVA file into VirtualBox and start it. And that's pretty much it. And once you start it, it will look like, well, not all this other stuff. Hang on. It'll look like that. Not that bit. This. It should just come to this screen. So hopefully everyone's at this screen. So yeah, download the OVO file, which was the one I linked at the very, very start. Install VirtualBox. Don't think mine didn't even need a reboot. Import the OVA, press play, and you should be here. Once you're here, go to open your Firefox up the top and go to tenable.com/downloads, and then you'll see download and install Nessus, and then you just click download. Hopefully, and I think that's what I put back here. And you know what? I'm just going to give folks a minute or so, maybe screenshot if you haven't got it. Once you've done that, you'll need to install it. So to do that, oh, what's happened? Yep. To do that, you open your prompt up, ls downloads, and then you'll see here I've got my Nessus-10.7 blah 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 blah. And so from here you just need to run that command, right? So sudo dpkg-I, right? Is that the whole thing? Yep. Run that. I'm not going to do it because I've already done it. But you do that and you'll see it do its thing. And then once that's happened, you'll need to run that last piece, which is different thing, which is the starting it. So run bin system CTL. So this piece down the bottom. So sorry, I'm just going to take this out of the way again. So once you've done that, if you open a browser, you should be able to get to HTTPS parrot 8834. So right, that address there. And it should take you to the screen that lets you quickly register. It's quite hard, isn't it, to do it this way?
Yeah, there's a few steps going on. It's a learning process for all involved.
And so once you've done that, hopefully you're at that screen. I might just quickly. Yes, the session is recorded, yeah. So for anyone that's see people still downloading Nessus. So the next thing is just to register. I will typically go register for Nessus Essentials. So Essentials is the free one, which is non-commercial use. Go continue. I am just going to fill it in. Right. I guess register. And what it will do, hopefully. Yeah, cool. Okay, and that's it. So then you just create a admin account. You can just put in whatever you like here. By the way, that's not admin password. And it'll just wrap up. We're going to do two things tonight. We're going to do this very quick. And while that's running, we're going to run the social engineering toolkit. So I'm going to let that keep going. Social engineering toolkit. So the social engineering toolkit comes with Parrot. It also comes with Kali for anyone that is running Kali Linux. So if you go applications, pen testing, where is it? I normally just type it in. You know what? It's funny because I had it open before.
I really need to work on my random talking to do while you do this, so that it's
there
less.
There it is.
Dead end.
Exploitation social engineering toolkit. So if you pop this open, this is going to be fast. So this social engineering toolkit is a tool that's used. So if anyone is going to want to test, it's really funny. My computer, which is obviously running this virtual machine, has decided it's getting pretty heavy loaded, and the fan's just turned on. It sounds like someone's started a car in here. Anyway, so if anyone wants to do, sort of a phishing test with permission, of course, of an organization, and also on the flip side, to see how easy phishing campaigns are run, this is a tool that does that. So, I mean, obviously, this is not to be for educational purposes and all that sort of stuff. So, don't be phishing people. And so, this social industry toolkit, install with Parrot. You just honestly, this is it. You go 1, and you go 2, for example, website attack vector, and you say, I want to harvest some credentials. 3, and you go, I'm not going to site clone, but a site clone would say, okay, point it at URL X and make it look like that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go website template, IP address, that sounds good to me, and make it look like Google. And we're done. That's it. That was it. So if I go back to my other computer, what was that IP address again? Sorry, I should have said take another IP address. So mine's 192.168.1.45. So, a threat actor could put that into an email, or if you're doing a test, put it into an email, send it around to whoever you're testing. And I'm trying to get to my browser. Where'd it go? It's my browser. We're winning with this browser today. So if there it is. So if I go here, and I go 192.168.1.45, that looks like Google. Now, just so we know this isn't staged. Actually, if I go to Parrot, you'll see here, see the HTTP GET has come. So this is saying that this host is hitting this website. Give me an email address, just a random one. Doesn't have to be legit, Chantal. Just make it up.
Sorry, I was looking to unmute, but so just give any email address.
Any, and it make it not real. Just make it up, just like, blah blah something.com.
Test George at Test ITM.
Test George with an E at test.itm, and give me a password. Not your actual password, just a password.
If I gave you my actual password, you would
You know what
probably
I'm going to do? I'm going to prove it. So you've seen this here, right? So
Yeah.
This has popped up. So let's just grab this one. Like, that's random. You know what? I'm going to keep clicking it. There you go. That's random as random could be. So just do that, hit sign in. And finally, oh, that's weird. It took me to Google. But if I go back here, oh, look at that.
Ooh.
So it's captured what I put in that box. As the victim, it's gone, oh, that's weird. It took me to Google. That didn't work. And you just sign in again. But, at the same time, whoever's at the back end here has worked out what's gone in. So that's how easy that is, which is kind of a bit scary, which is why I can't emphasize enough, enable multi-factor authentication. Meanwhile, look at that. Nessus has appeared. So Nessus, really straightforward here. I think it's... So someone's put, but the IP is private. I'm going to answer that. So the IP is private. Is it supposed to work if we send him to the IP to authenticate? So that is correct. The IP is private, but if this was an actual threat actor, or if this was being done as a part of a legitimate phishing campaign, you would publish that as a public IP, and then it would work. Or maybe not a public IP, but an IP address that was accessible by whoever the target is. So obviously for this, I'm not going to go and do that, but if you can imagine, it's just like a web server, so it'll be published the same way. I think I've made my VM pretty angry because I hear it. It sounds like a jet taking off.
Well, maybe you have a jet in your house, and that is what is happening right now.
Yeah, let's see if I can. I want to click this button. Come on. It is kind of hot in here.
And it's Melbourne, so how's that working?
Yeah, exactly. I can't click new scan. Come on. Don't do this to me.
Murphy's Law.
Yeah, that's right. The idea would be that I click. Oh, there we go. No, still can't click. Come on.
Can you refresh? Will that help?
Maybe. Or I'll make it more angry.
Well, at least that's something.
What I might do, I might just kill that one. Back to Gibson. Remember, hugs are worth more than handshakes. All right. That's random. Okay. Really not letting me do anything. Oh. I think it's still doing something. Oh, to wait a bit longer.
While we wait, while that happens, Robert was asking, is the CompTIA Pen Test Plus course useful to learn to do pen testing in the real world as a follow-on from Security Plus?
Yeah. I mean, short answer. You know what's interesting? So the answer is yes. The CompTIA Pen Test Plus course would be useful. Any of those, sort of courses are going to be useful to some degree. But what I am going to say, in my experience, is that there's still that element of having to, get the hands-on experience as well. So I think with anything, the course is, building a good foundation for doing the testing, but there needs to be a lot of experience that needs to follow on from that. And that's certainly what I've experienced. And yeah, see James is saying plugins compiling. That's exactly what mine's doing. Well, this is going up.
Well, I'm going to dismiss the if this is a private IP because that was answered live, or I'm going to say that was answered live.
Yes, I've
Thank
DOS
you for
attacked
your
myself.
This is a learning experience. And now we know what happens when you DOS attack yourself. It interrupts you in the middle of a lab and a demonstration. Somebody's asking, what are the pros and cons to agent-based versus network-based vulnerability scanning?
Yeah, so good question. An agent-based vulnerability scan, there's going to be a few useful things. One is that the agent-based scan runs on the asset itself. So it's going to be able to have a more in-depth look at the asset rather than coming across the network. The second thing is often agent-based scans can be run more frequently. So because with a network-based scan, you'll have a network scanner like we have here as we sit here waiting, that will then go and attach itself to each network host and do a network-based scan, where you've got and use remote calls and things like that, where you've got an agent, it's running on the system and has full access to the system and it's reporting back. So, you're not limited by waiting for a scan to finish and starting again. It's effectively constantly polling. So if you're looking for a solution that's more continuous scanning, then agent-based is going to lend itself better generally than network-based scan. Oh, come on.
54%, that's not fair.
I was going to say, for anyone that really has to go, I'm going to keep going anyway. And yeah, watch it tomorrow if you want.
And we can maybe cut out some of the chatting in the middle. So while this is loading, I'm just going to chat a little bit. So if you are interested in studying online, and maybe there will be some loading of things, but we do have obviously smaller classrooms, so more chance to answer questions, etc. Our next intake closes in about a week. Next Friday, I think, is the last day you can apply, and it starts on the I'm going to double check that, the 8th of July. If you're interested at all, please contact us at admin@itmasters.edu.au or go to our IT Masters website, because I do think we cover a lot of these sort of areas in our IT Masters courses. But obviously, if you attend the paid courses, there are activities to do, there are assessments, there's a qualification at the end, and there are much more hands-on classes, because when you've got, 20 or 50 people in a class, it's a lot easier to have a hands-on class than we've got 300 and something attendees tonight. Bit different. And somebody's asking, how long do we have to complete the course final exam? It doesn't expire. You can complete, well, it might expire in a few years when it becomes too old, but it definitely is something you have time to do. But if you do complete it, and 2 other of our free short courses, you will have the ability to get 1 free subjects credit into our courses, and you have 1 hour to complete that final course exam once you start it. And for those of you who are interested in studying with IT Masters, we do currently have Commonwealth supported places available for Australian citizens. It is an incredible savings on the course cost. I think it costs about $1,100 a subject instead of nearly $4,000. 3,890, I think, is the normal cost of it. So it's definitely worth doing it right now. Somebody's asking if you need an undergraduate degree to do a graduate certificate or the master's degree. You need an undergraduate to do the master's, but you don't need one to do the graduate certificate if you have work experience or the relevant knowledge to do it. And you can complete a graduate certificate and get full credit into your master's. 65%.
Let's go with the questions though, while we just do that. So the notes and materials besides recording presentation slides to help for the cert. I think one of the things in week 1 I mentioned is that there is an official study guide. I think there's some others as well. I would encourage additional study besides this, because there's a lot of content to get through. We definitely haven't gone through absolutely everything, and nor can we in that sort of time period. I think overall there's about 40 hours worth of content in the entire course. It as in you should spend that much time studying. There is the text. I was a bit blurry, but so there's the official text that goes into a lot more sort of detail. As I said, yeah, I would definitely encourage that. I do see a question in the other thing about resitting the exam. You could do it. What's the requirement there? I can't remember. You could do it multiple times, can't you? Not the Security Plus exam, as in the exam for this.
That is an interesting question that you've put me on the spot for, because I'm actually not sure.
Final one time. There you go.
Yeah, so you can resit your weekly quizzes, I believe, but the final exam, you said it once, it's open book. You should be able to complete it if you've attended these webinars. You'll be fine. And, done the work with it.
Almost there.
So somebody is asking about scholarships for non-Australian and New Zealand students. We don't currently have anything. We will keep you abreast if you've registered for this course. We'll send you emails sometimes. But you can study online with us if you'd like to get more information, please visit our website, register. We've got an eligibility section where if you fill out your industry qualifications and your experience, our eligibility officer will contact you and let you know how much credit you can be eligible for, whether you're eligible for the course, all of that information. And basically the fastest, cheapest way you can get our qualifications if that is part of your interest.
This is like watching paint dry. I'm glad you're here to
I'm trying to be as interesting as possible, but I can't promise I am. We've had a few questions about downloading the materials. These will be available tomorrow. We have to, run the webinar before we actually upload the materials, but they will definitely be available tomorrow.
I think we're almost there.
Almost there, hopefully.
It'll be quicker if I stop looking at it.
Is that how that works?
I think so.
Worst case scenario, maybe we can, if it's just not going to load, somebody's saying that's IT. Absolutely. This is how that works.
The reason I didn't pre-do it is because I wanted to go through the registration process. So
yeah, I don't really know what the answer to that is besides just the internet being faster.
Yeah, maybe.
Definitely going to take a class on how I can be a better random chatter so that people, aren't sitting here just listening to me say nothing. So if you don't know, George teaches our cyber warfare and terrorism subject, which is just finishing up. And what's your subject for session 2?
Server admin.
Server admin. But we do also have ITR 581, cybersecurity fundamentals running, because it runs every single session for anyone who is looking to jump in and is new to the area. Somebody's saying you could tilt your PC sideways. Listen, I can't promise it won't work.
Oh my God.
That is now stalled, I believe.
No, it hasn't.
Well, it's 82%. It was 80% last time you checked.
That's 83. I know, and this machine isn't exactly a slouch either. So, but I've actually had to turn the fan on because it's getting kind of hot in here.
Next up, George is going to do a little dance for us. He's got a song prepared.
No, the next thing is I'm going to probably have a panic attack when I get my electricity bill.
And we will be uploading this to the learn.itmasters.edu.au site tomorrow, so that Kit can leave this webinar and do anything other than work. And then tomorrow this will be uploaded to YouTube and to the Learn site, and you guys can post, and maybe we can cut out this section of vamping. That it's not really
we could
my
cut out the waiting part in the middle. Someone's put about wearing a t-shirt. So it's not my heater, it's actually my CPU fan that's making it hot in here.
This is
There's a lot of hot air coming out the side.
The glamorous behind the scenes look.
Look at that, almost there. But let's be honest. I mean, this, and someone said it, this is IT. This is what happens. And put it this way, I'm going to touch wood, but it's not like the demo's failed. It's just taking longer than I thought it would.
Really, really testing the strength of how much we can chat.
So someone's put a comment there about written instructions. So I think that's probably one. I'm happy to pop that into the and it's going to be pretty sort of more bullet pointy, but get this, do that, run this, pop that into the into the LMS.
Bullet pointy would probably be good. Hopefully, just do this, wait for a while, and hope that people aren't watching you wait.
I think I need to download it again. I think I'll just oh
93.
no, that's the other thing. You got to like hover away and then come back because I just went from 89 to 93. All right.
We are literally watching paint dry at this moment.
Yeah. 94. Look at that, 94. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start talking now because I think 6%. I'm hoping it better not do that. Like I'm going to sit on 99% for the next 3 days. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scan my local network, see what's out there, see what I haven't patched. I've got enough devices floating around here that maybe something interesting will pop up. So 95%. I wish it would let you be, well, you're at 95, just let me scan. $26. You run out of things to say.
Well, somebody's saying I had not attended webinar 1 or 2. Can I complete the tasks of those 2 before the last webinar to complete this course? Absolutely, you can. And you will have the ability we leave our courses remaining open. And as I said, if you complete 3 of these free short courses, you are eligible to 1 subject's in unspecified industry credit into the IT Masters courses. So that is something exciting. But even if you aren't interested in the paid courses, we still have our courses open for you guys.
Someone's put a thing in there that says VirtualBox doesn't seem to be supported on Mac Silicon. What do you suggest? UTM. So I have a Mac here on Mac Silicon, and I've used UTM. And then there's a UTM image on Parrot, so you could just download that. Ooh. Oh.
Guys.
Better not be lies. I feel like it's going to be kind of anticlimactic too, because it's going to be like, all right, I'm just going to point it now. And we are not going to wait till the scan's finished, because that will take some time. We'll be here for a while. Don't say that.
Yeah, I'm not going to be here for a while. I think there's a limit to my patience here.
No, we're good. So we should be able to actually do the scan now because it's finished. Oh, the funny thing is my computer's gone quiet now. Okay. Why is this still gray?
Oh my God. If that still doesn't work, I'm going to find out where your computer is and throw it out the window.
It should just work. Yeah, no, look at that.
I really love this.
You know why? It's because I said that it hasn't crashed yet.
Yeah. What's great about this is I've already told you about the subject evaluation questionnaire that we're going to send out. This is probably going to be a key part of it. Hopefully we can get this to work. If we can't,
Oh, yeah, great. It's not even doing anything now. It's just like great.
oh my God, it's my least favorite part of the evening. So somebody has said a dialog window will appear. Welcome to Nessus. To
I think
enter
that popped up already.
Mm.
I'm going to do the old restart the browser thing. I'd take that.
Our apologies about the technical difficulties, but this is how IT works, right?
I should have just started with the social engineering toolkit. That one's already done. Here we go again. Fans turn back up.
Is that a good sign?
There we go.
Hey.
Right. Right. And net. Right. So I'm pointing it to my network range. Going to scan the whole range. Bit scared that. Oh, yeah. Well, that's me. You know what? Let's just do the one. Oh, no, it's itself. Oh, that's a good point. I can only scan 16 hosts, so this won't take that long. Cool. All right. Let's just do that one and that one and that one. That'll do. I don't even know what they are. Run scan. Point is, that's pretty much it. So this is doing a network-based scan, opposed to an. Oh, look, think of the top right. Plugins done compiling. Get lost. Starting scan. Okay, it's running. If anyone's wondering, it's running. There we go. Oh, it's nothing. Anyway, that is the process. I mean, you could sit there and watch me scan this for the next. I shouldn't take too long, but or
I'm going to be honest. I'm disappointed that we waited all that long and it wasn't, fireworks and something exciting.
fireworks.
I don't
Here
know.
we go. Look, stuff. Medium. There you go. I should probably fix that. So here's an example of a configuration one, IP forwarding enabled. Having said that, I actually do forward IP, so that would make sense that that's there, but it has detected it as something that I should look at. So again, this was kind of the whole point. I'm glad it didn't come up with absolutely nothing because that would have been annoying. Still going. I'm kind of hoping it doesn't come up with anything critical. I don't want that either. Anyway, so this is what, yeah, I'm sorry, this is it. So this is a vulnerability scan. You could see I've scanned a few IPs. You can see stuff's filtering in. You can see it's still going, but you can see on the right, it's broken down by the criticality. You could see on this second column here, CVSS 6.5. So if we think back to, oopsie, where did my mouse go? Oh,
It's there. It's on the link on the.
no, but my computer's like starting to go a bit slow, go slow. Probably catch on fire in a minute. So 6.5. So remember, it's out of 10. So that's why, hence it's popped up as a medium. But if I was doing a vulnerability scan of an environment, I would look at obviously that 6.5. Pretty easy because I've only got one. It's not like I've got a squillion things on there. But yeah, that's how you would use that information. So I've actually lost my mouse cursor. Oh, you know what's happened? I think my mouse has gone flat. 1 second. Yeah, I think my mouse has died. 1 sec. Yep, it's back. My mouse is flat. All right. So then if you go into it, you can actually get a bit more detail. So you could say that a remote host has IP forwarding and actually an attacker can exploit this route packets through, potentially bypass some firewalls. So as I said, I've got a port that's published, which is why this is appearing. So this is not unexpected for me, but it gives you a bit more detail around it. You can go down to the CVE and look at the particular details around that CVE. So if I go in here, gonna let that load in the background. Is this finish it? Still running. Slow, isn't it? Still running. Oh, we got more. Oh. Yeah. So at least this makes me feel a little bit better that I haven't got anything critical pop up, and that what I do have is expected medium. I expect IP forwarding enabled. So that's how you use a vulnerability scanner. And yeah, maybe we need a faster internet connection.
Or yeah, next time maybe we redo it and just cut out some of this. Anyway, it was educational.
It was educational, cliche all at the same time. I'm going to ask some questions in there. Is this scanning safe to run in a home environment? So short answer is yes. So Nessus Essentials is designed for home use. It is non-commercial. You can only scan 16 IP addresses, but there should be no issues. Obviously, that's not hand and heart. There won't be any issues. I have seen things where printers spit out 10 pages with smiley faces in the corner, stuff like that may happen. That's true. That's actually happened. But generally speaking, it should be fine. Are there any risks or considerations doing discovery scans on a large environment? Yes, probably back to my comment around smiley faces in the top corner of pages, but I've also had environments where there's been phone systems that are a bit temperamental and a scan has been done and it's actually knocked that phone system offline, in which case the next time that scan was run, they had to be explicitly excluded. But then there was a whole other issue then because now it's out of the scope of vulnerability scanning. So those are the types of things. Are there any assets that are potentially a little bit unstable that need to be considered? Also, is there any sensors and so forth that are looking for scanning, because scanning may trigger it may trigger a SOC. A SOC may sit at a security operations center might say, oh, someone's doing a port scan. So yeah, there are definitely some considerations like that that need to be considered.
Alrighty, it has now been an hour and 45 minutes and we still have over 200 attendees, which is great. Thank you guys for sticking around. But I do think it might be reaching the time where we need to wrap it up.
We also had a lot of content. I had to start talking really fast towards the end there.
It was really great. And we can see if we can cut out some of this, but either way, some amazing content covered by George and some really great questions. But again, if we didn't get to your question, we can put them on the forums so that the other people in the course can answer them.
Well, thanks for sticking around. And
thank you everyone who stuck around
and watch me sweat.
And thank you, George, for hosting tonight, and Kit for answering questions on the chat. We will be back again next week to do the final webinar, and all the materials will be uploaded by tomorrow on the learn.itmasters.edu.au website. Don't forget to fill out the survey, even if part of your answer is that was a long delay. We still love to hear it. And I think that's about it for tonight.
Cool. Thanks very much. I need to go and stand outside in the cold for a bit.
Well, it's Melbourne, so it's plenty cold out there.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the patience.